is it all right? Would you guys be okay if I finish off some thoughts on Sacred and Terrible Air, the book?
So is this an epilogue?
This is an epilogue. Okay. Epilogue discussion, correct. So Sacred and Terrible Air, we finished it, and I remember we were just trying to piece together what the finale of that was, and as we kind of, went over the facts and stuff, it was like, hey, you need to go revisit this, look a little further, figure out what else is going on, and piece together what's happening. I feel like immediately afterwards, especially given the energy levels, I kind of just speculated for 10 minutes about things that were happening or such, but that doesn't feel like a particularly satisfying conclusive discussion. And it's like, I'd say you either want to end it on the final page and go thank you for watching, but if you're going to have a discussion, it should be a fruitful discussion. And I didn't particularly like that it was just kind of speculating into the air and we didn't get anything from that. So coming back to it, doing a little bit of revisiting, looking into other people's discussions on it as well, looking into the stuff that was mentioned briefly, and some of the connections that were formed with Disco Elysium. I wanted to bring up some more concrete and interesting thoughts about how it ended, what it seems it was going for as a whole, and stuff that was missed in the conclusion of that discussion after we read it. Mm-hmm. So I talked about it a little bit yesterday on the podcast, but I didn't want to spoil the events for anybody that happens to want to go back through the book. But the idea, if you were to take away Disco's Disco Elysium breaks its main deals into the four political alignments, right? You have your fascism, communism, ultra-liberal, and moralist thoughts that you can go on the vision quest for, and those are the things that breaks down. This book is about the fifth and final of those thoughts, of those political alignments, nihilism, right? And it doesn't initially start there. It gets introduced a little bit when Ziggy gets brought into the picture, and then it goes heavily into it towards the back half, and especially in the final reading of what we did, right? And the nihilism, not centrism, mind you, because that the moralist point of view is the one of incremental progress. We make no changes. We keep things where they are. Nihilism is the final stage at the end when you give up in what you believe in, and you lose all hope and faith and concern and essentially love, right? From where you once stood, if you had passion for what you believed in. They particularly frame it in such a way that they describe it as the step a hair's breadth away from communism. And I think that comparison point being so close is interesting, because it's not the it's not the cool. It's like they introduce Ziggy as he's born from a nihilist father, from a communist father that kind of gave way to that, and then he is calling everything bourgeoisie, and he has that edge to it. It's cool to be disaffected and all that, right? But in reality, it is something that is but when you really, it's more than just the cool image of it. There is the aspect of it that is born from hopelessness, right? The particular thing, I think, is when you look at how they introduce what does communism smell like? It smells like failure, right? You're looking at it as these the critiques of fascism and ultraliberalism are almost overt in their obviousness of this is a cold, brutal, and selfish way to live, right? This is a way to live that shows very little concern for your fellow man. And a moralist way to live is one that shows performative concern, right? The idea of wanting to help the suffering of others, but not really wanting to rock the boat too much, right? So those in and of themselves are kind of obvious what the flaw is there. Communism, on the other hand, is something there where you want to help your fellow man and you want everyone to be on the same page, and you want to have this sense of evenness.
But human nature gets in the way.
And that's the thing, right? It's easier to critique these other ones because of the nature of how selfish they are. But this one, it is inherently aiming for something not selfish, but then it crashes up against how it crashes up against people who don't want to participate in that. People who reject its idea, or people who just say, I don't want that, I want to be selfish, right? It's subject to the whims of anyone who is sociopathic or able to basically like be a fascist but hide their intentions and slip their way up through the cracks of power, and then from the top govern down, even though it's like, we're doing this for the people, but I'm really just a dictator, right? I'm gonna force my way down as if it were I'm gonna be as authoritarian as fuck, but I'm gonna say it's all in the name of the people, but really I'm just living the life of a dictator in any other circumstances, you know? You can be performative about that. If you have that lust for power, you can always find your way through. So it's susceptible to things like that. But the idea being born from a place of like actually wanting this like equality and such, there's a purity to that ideal. And then you start seeing where the rubber meets the road, and like the amount of times that it results in then the wars that break out, the people against the wall, the bodies, right? And when you are looking at, and this is something where you can imagine, especially in like a setting of someone growing up in like in a country like Estonia, or like a setting in a real world thing of like the history of communism in multiple places, you can imagine one where like we want something good, but if we can't accomplish this, if the world rejects it, if the country rejects it, if our fellow man rejects it, if it won't come to pass, what the fuck is the point? You know, especially if there's like, oh, well, yeah, the majority of people might actually want this, but you're currently in a place where the powers that be have unfairly created a world where you cannot change things without massive, bloody, violent revolution. And even then that might get quelled. So if you think that's justified and you push that means to its ends, you're still going to potentially hit a wall where it doesn't matter if it's the majority of the will of the people. You don't have the power to make a change for a better world that you believe in. Therefore, well, what the fuck is the point of any of this, right?
Yeah.
And then nihilism sets in.
Yeah.
You're hoping for something in this world that is going to make life better for you and everyone you know. You're hoping for
no matter how good
what you
or bad
see
it
as
is.
Potential happiness, and it doesn't come to pass, and you're roadblocked along the way by your fellow comrades and by the opposition and by every angle of this, and so you turn inside to nihilism, the smell of failure. This time we're going to do it right? But what's the fucking point, right? And that's why they're so adjacent to each other, compared especially to the other three,
which are really driven in their own way,
but clearly have no problems stepping on the necks of others to get what they want.
Yeah, because I know where they're going.
But this also is like you'll line up against the wall.
Yeah, there's movement happening. There's no nothing stale happening. Yeah,
and so that's where you look at like, okay, this is what the book is trying to discuss here, and those moments with Ziggy and Ignis in particular are your key analysis of like what nihilism means in this setting, right? Okay, so with that as the primer of like the fifth, political alignment, the final one at the end, you then get the closing chapters where they introduce in the epilogue, Ion Rodionov, right? The mathematician that understands the math of the Pale, and he's the one that creates the nihilism bomb, right? He uses Harnankar as a weapon of mass negation, right? Understands it to the point, to such a point that like it makes perfect sense then that if he's raising the kid next to him, Ambrosius St. Miro, that Ambrosius St. Miro would then go on to be the innocence that becomes the timeless entity, a religion, a cult, and the perfect understanding of nihilism then leads to this person who's essentially the Pope of nihilism calling about for the end of the world, you know, and is backed by a Mesk, and they have nihilist fascists that are essentially like carrying out the will, right? Which then eventually leads to the nuking of Revachol. So the thing with it in particular that is super key and important to note is that nihilism, more than just being a political ideology here, is literally what is causing the Pale to occur. It is coming from that Rodionov's bomb, which detonates and causes Rodionov's Deep. It's coming from within, right? Depending on the character. And there's moments where you see, for example, Ziggy is in the Pale, going further in than others are able to, right? He can survive the Pale and handle it more than others. Why? Because he's fucking nihilist.
Okay.
He's born in it. His dad was all about that, and then he himself is nothing but that inside.
Molded by it.
Right? And shaped by it. He has that so deep inside. He has an immunity to it as he's moving through it, right? And then we start to find out why he's moving through it. As he's going along through the Pale, he's moving with Ignis, the partner of Krasmazov, the father of communism, the Marx of this world, right? And Ignis is literally there, the spirit of communism, talking to him about, all the things they accomplished. And and then he's like, yeah, and what about the bodies? And he's like, no, but it was true. It was real communism. We were accomplishing it, right? And we were doing this with love for our fellow man. And in the moment he starts describing his true love for fellow man and what they wanted and what they believed in and what the world they were hoping to achieve would look like, the Pale retreats from his feet and color bursts back into the world. And then Ziggy goes, man, what the fuck are you talking about? You put 12,000 bodies on spikes. And then he's like, yeah. And then it takes back over. But there's a moment where literally love, even though it's fucked up and coming from this twisted place where you are trying to create your own justification for the atrocities you've committed, the true believer inside creates a moment of hope that retreats the Pale briefly, and then the nihilism sets back in and brings it all back. So the world of Disco Elysium, the floating Isolas, the eating away of the entire planet that it once was, is essentially giving up on anything in humanity, and the entirety of mankind giving up on all of its hopes, dreams, love, and that just taking over and being a chain reaction that can never really be undone, and it seems like you can always get to nihilism from wherever you stand, and then some people choose to embrace it, lean into it, go as far as they can. And this is where, you get that little moment where the love causes it to retreat for just a moment. And Ignis is doing this because there's a line he has where he says, because communism failed, right? And then Krasmazov blew his fucking brains out. So he has Ignis is saying to Ziggy, if the world stops loving our ideas, you and Rodionov are second best. In other words, if we can't accomplish communism, then fuck the world. Who cares? We give up on it, right? Let nihilism take over.
Yeah.
He's straight up saying that. And you and Rodionov, you being Ziggy, the nihilist moving through the Pale, and Rodionov, the one who understands and invents what this becomes to be and invents the weapon of mass negation, are the embodiment of nihilism in this setting, So that is the link physically between those two things. And the idea that Rodionov's Deep is ground zero where the Harnankar bomb was detonated, it's also where Ziggy is trying to get to, which is where theoretically the girls are, you know? So when it comes to the girls, we don't have a lot of full answers. We just have a couple of questions, but we know that Doom is Malin, has the same name with the, not umlaut, but and with the symbol, right? And there's a couple other signs. I talked about it live before, but it's like, he got chased by the Lund father, right? And he threw a brick through the window of the Lund house. But we also earlier saw him refer to Malin as like the prettiest girl in school, and she referred to him as the baddest boy in school, right? We know that he had a mixtape for Ziggy, and it was a heart drawn over the eye, right? So there was a relationship there that was happening outside of Khan's purview, and he didn't want to admit it. He didn't want to accept it to himself, but he was straight up like he had a relationship off camera with Malin. She then reappears as to him in that moment at the party as well, when he left the party and was all drunk and fucked up and everything. Like, she then reappears as Doom.
Yeah.
Right. And then after that, we don't know what happens except they're gone. And then Ziggy orchestrates a number of events to try and either track them down. He gets obsessed with the disappearance. He tattoos the ages on his fingers. He's obsessed, and he's trying to get in there as well, right? Did they...
In a way, the tattoos makes it that he never forgets.
Now, the question is the obsession that he has coming from a place where they made an agreement to meet each other? Or did she become a non-entity and all the girls left with her, and then he's chasing into the Pale to try and find them and to try and find her, right? It's unclear. We don't know what the end of that relationship is and whether or not she went on her own way with intentions that he follow or not. But the fact that he's like doing these weird things with the tattoos, the obsession, sending the letters, right? Buying Harnankar, the next copy of it, all of that seems to indicate like perhaps they went without him. And now he's flying into it with the Pale navigation machine, knowing where they are, trying to get to them, but also hoping that like, one, that he can make it, and two, that like, yeah, they're non-entities, so that they continue to exist in this space physically that only he knows about, right? Khan and the boys refuse to forget them, therefore they can't be completely lost into the Pale. She's messaging him, giving him dreams, showing up for the last second to tell him to please forget about us. He's the only thing holding back their complete disappearance, causing them pain, because their own mother seems to have forgotten about them. And not only does it say that she's forgotten about them, it details as well that like signs of their birth on her body started to disappear. So it, again, manifests physically in the world in the same way that the pictures start to disappear as well. Why and how do they want to disappear? What does that come from? We don't get enough details on it. But the closest thing we do have is that scene on the beach where she ODs, right? And they go into heavy description of the process of the chemical marriage going through her body. And there's a moment where it describes how inside her, there's a baby Pale that's formed in that peak moment of like going through all the emotions, where she experiences something like it's an OD and it's an orgasm at the same time, and it's all kinds of crazy things happening. But that is the only link we have to like, perhaps in that moment, how can it be so good? Why is it so good? It shouldn't be this good. Something's wrong, right? It could be that moment like created inside a baby Pale, aka a nihilism, or whatever it is inside of her that she needed more of, right? Maybe she got addicted to that feeling, to that. And this is just me, I'm just speculating.
Yeah, okay.
But the idea of that OD moment creating an addiction to that feeling, to that nihilism that is physically manifesting inside of her as small Pale, makes perfect sense. That who does she get attracted to after that?
The super nihilist.
The nihilist at school, right? She needs that. She needs more of that. You're going to be my doom, he says, right? So she's drawn towards this person. Now, is he enough? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe at a certain point, she's like, I need more. I need the Pale itself. I want to become a non-entity. Maybe that addiction leads to her convincing the others, and then they all decide to get as much pale as possible and to just go into it, to disappear themselves and to cease existing. They get addicted to the idea of nihilism and to the idea of pale, right? That feeling can't be replicated. And they were already on the cherry speed and going nuts. If, I don't know, but this is all just speculation. But it's like she has that moment inside her, something awakens. She goes with this dude who's walking nihilism, and then they're gone entirely into the root point, the deepest point of the pale, 4,000 miles away kilometers away from society, so that seems to be likely what happened, and Ziggy, either abandoned or given a promise of something, is just chasing after them to try and get back to Malin specifically. All of this is happening in the background while the three main characters, notice they have nothing to do with any of the explanation so far. They're lost souls. There's nothing else to it. They're damaged in their own right. They never recovered. They had moments of beauty, and those are the highlights of their lives. But ultimately, Taresh may be the one that gets off the easiest. He's probably locked up away somewhere. But, Khan is just homeless and broken when the world ends. And Jesper just wanders off into it. Burns everything and then straight up walks into the pale, which mirrors, if anything, him almost drowning on that surfboard. When there was that scene of him just like letting go in the water, It's kind of like perhaps a foreshadowing of like the idea of that he's going to just let himself get washed away in the pale as well. So maybe that's why that scene took place, to kind of establish that part of it. Last bit with all that is the role that the innocences play in the setting. And this is straight up someone was taking the timeline of the different innocences as described according to the book when you read it in Disco and such, right? So the Paracarnassian created a church of social control and class society. Franco Negro enforced nationalism and militarism and industrialism. Dolores Day ushered in an era of bourgeoisie society and global capital. Sola's silence solidified modern moralism and suppressed the dream of communism, even if she wouldn't claim any of the achievements. So the innocences in Disco Elysium are the ones who control the shape of the world and the timeline. There's something introduced in the setting called magpies, which are those who are able to essentially read the future because they have access to pale. They can they have an inherent understanding of it in a way that lets them predict things and understand what's going to come. It seems as if the innocences are some of the strongest magpies in the setting who know the future and are then able to rob the future from the world and take it away from them. The world spirit in Disco Elysium doesn't have a body. It has organs like Arno van Eck and Hardcore and Dolores Day, and the innocences are all those people that are organ thieves, essentially taking from the future and in knowing what it's going to be, guiding it towards less and less again, hope, love, anything towards this state of nihilism, for whatever their purposes are. Each of them was a different purpose up to that point, but the one who's noted as the final innocence here, the Ambrosius and the Saint Miro and the nihilist fascists that come in, basically just come in at the end of the timeline to finish the job, right? They're just like, yeah, we're just gonna end all of this because we worship the idea of nihil, of nothingness, and sets the nuke off and wants that to obliterate all times and all existence and such. Of course, there's thoughts and theories about the idea of like when it goes off, it affects not just like that moment in space time, but like everything going backwards and forwards, which is why Pale can pull things from the wrong side of time forward and from forward all the way back. So you have things like you getting a call from way in the past, when the echoes of the Pale are coming forward, but you similarly have Self-Chiller's intro drop vibrating in the windows when Mazov is about to blow his fucking brains out back in the past when the communist revolution fails. you know? So it's like the explosion happens at a point and then things go in both directions. The thought then with how all of that links is because that directly leads to the nuking of Revachol, and then we see that referenced later on in Disco Elysium. Speculative, but the thought is Sacred and Terrible Air spells the end of the world, right? Everything is lost to nihilism. And I can imagine as well that coming from a place where perhaps Kurvitz, surrounded by people who had hopes and dreams for a better country, for a better future, based on political awakening, were then faced with people who gave up on all of that and were surrounded by the idea of nihilism and gave into that and effectively went, I'm just going to sit back and who cares about all this shit? There's no point. And that's the death of it all, right? So that's the most threatening thing in this universe, right? This came first in the book. There's speculation that Disco coming afterwards is taking place in Revachol before the end.
Yeah.
And you get Shivers who's calling out to Harry saying, you can save me.
Yeah, in this many years,
this is going to happen.
This is going to happen.
But you can do something about it, right? And we know the importance of what Harry plays in that role, you know, by the end of it, like just carrying that shit on his back, a walking, insane fucking example of a human being that has more on their shoulders than anyone else can possibly carry. The idea that Shivers, the city itself, the world itself is reaching out and going, you can potentially save me. And this is where we've jumped back to in the timeline. Yes, things likely head for the place that it plays out in the Sacred and Terrible Air book, where it all comes to an end regardless. But the one thing that's unanswered in Disco that it hints at that was not around in Sacred and Terrible Air is La Retour. There's a concept, the return. It's the final mission in the game, and it's something mentioned by Classier, by Shivers, and by fucking punk girl, Cindy. They talk about the return. And the thought is that the return could be, it's a movement. It's something that they're anticipating might happen. The skull, exactly. They're anticipating this potential movement that might happen in which the RCM and the revolutionaries can overthrow the moral intern and create change. And maybe what they're referencing is the idea of fixing this timeline and stopping it from the eventual annihilation that's coming, because the moral intern does nothing to stop the innocents from destroying the world. You know, so it could be that them hinting at that in the future, them making a reference to it, Shivers making a potential reference to it, and then the fact that it's that final mission is one day I shall return to your side, right? The words burning in the concrete after the shootout occurs. Un jour, je serai retour de toi.
Je serai près de toi.
Près de toi, oui. Yeah. That could be like hinting at the idea of Disco Elysium coming after, but coming after this Sacred and Terrible Air introduction to the world is a potential way that Revachol can be saved. But that would have to come in whatever the next game would be, right? But like that's the speculative bit. It's like this is destined to die. Everything's destined to fucking get nuked to shit. But what if Harry and what if the return represent a change in that timeline that might save it? A little bit of optimism, you know, and maybe just maybe even there's a moment where the understanding of love being the antithesis to the nihilism, there's a way to return this pale. Who knows, right? But that's if you want to be optimistic about it.
Yeah.
But I assume in a world where we talk about like, damn, everything comes to an end and there's moments of beauty, but that's all there is to it. Ironically, in that initial thing after reading the book and seeing how badly it ends up for most characters, you are inclined to give in to nihilism. You know?
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, that little moment where the color returns to the world and then like, and then no, it takes back over. Maybe this new return is a way to fight back against the nothingness and to fight back against the idea of just giving up because the world refuses to change or accept things the way they are.
Defeatist. It's no hope. No hope. It's a bleak picture.
That might be what that book was about.
And it's okay.
Isn't that fucking cool?
Yeah.
Isn't that the coolest shit ever? That's so sick. What an amazing setting. Harry could do it. I believe Harry could do it. Does that make Harry an innocence? I mean, I don't know. You know, do you have to be a magpie to be an innocence? You know, I don't know if that's a prerequisite, but it certainly makes the job easier. But holy fuck, man. That's such a cool thing. And if that's where this was going, god damn, are we robbed? Are we robbed of the future of this world and what could have been? Because you have A New Hope. If this was a trilogy, A New Hope would be everything dies. And then Empire Strikes Back is, but what if we changed it? And then the Return of the Jedi would be, where do we steer the timeline? Where do we go in a different direction? And what are the results of that? You know? And is Harry the key to that? Or whatever? Is there a thought that's the key to that? Is there a counter nihilist thought that can be ascribed to the political compass? Optimism? It can't be that simple. There's too many realities to deal with, and there's too many conflicting forces, and each one of these ones pretty much, again, is subject to critique the moment you encounter someone who rejects it violently, right? So,
you need more than just optimism. You need faith.
You need perhaps, right? No, I would say that like Kim has faith, literally, is a believer, but is shown to be somebody who's like religious in a non-destructive way.
Yeah.
You know, quite interestingly, I think it's very cool how Kim is that type of character.
Yeah. Like faith without being like religious, you know, in a way, just faith in believing and
humanist
things to come. You know,
is that the word? Is that the word to you know? I don't know. And I don't know that it can really put a label on it. But I think it doesn't necessarily need to. But I think Kurvitz can accomplish the goal if he simply warns you perhaps of the dangers of just giving in to nihilism. That's the death of all things, when you just stop caring.
Yeah.
You know, no matter how cool and edgy it might seem. I give this book a fucking second round of applause.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, you did a good job going around and wrapping it up then.
Cool.
You got the extra information you needed.
Yes. Yeah. And a much deeper appreciation for it. And I hope if you're watching this, that you do as well. So, fuck yeah. Okay, there. Segment. All right, let me take a sip.
So we won't be getting anything from that universe?
Not until a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo gets sorted out. If you haven't tuned in for Sacred and Terrible Error, the Disco Elysium book, and you thought any of that was interesting, go check it out, because I assure you, spoilers or no, the game is the game. The book is excellent. The words used to describe everything are absolutely worth experiencing, regardless of the events being told to you. And if you're intrigued, yeah, go back and listen to that. I don't I don't like when everything has to be like, I don't like it that it has to keep relating to disco to be the hook point. But admittedly, Josh did on the phone. He's like, dude, just write that. Like, if you just write Sacred and Terrible Error, no one's gonna know what that is. He's like, use the word Disco Elysium in the title. Don't be an idiot. Let people who might have an interest in this know that this is connected to something they care about. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. You know, like seeing like. You know, I just don't want. I don't like. I can imagine like someone like Kurvitz or anyone involved seeing almost like WoolieVersus, a super best friends play story. You know what I mean? Like it's not. They let it stand on its own 2 feet. Yeah. You know, so I don't always want to have to pull that back in, but it does so much interesting things to both. And when you link the two and get at what he's hopefully trying to get across. But yes, let it stand on its own 2 feet. It's just, I don't know that enough people would click out of curiosity, Okay. KYH9, how you doing? Disco Elysium is because I wouldn't say Harry ever hit the nihilism stage, even when he erased his own personality. I would almost say the personality wipe was his attempt to step back from the edge of nihilism and offload some of his own baggage.
Interesting point of view.
You could even put the political ideologies in disco on a scale of romance to realism, with fascism being way on the romantic side and nihilism being way on the realism side. And it turns out you need a certain ratio of the two. That's a pretty astute observation, KYH. I like that a lot. That's very, very good. Yeah, fascism is hyper romanticized. Nihilism is hyper realistic. Be realistic. You can't change things. Be realistic. Don't be too idealistic. That's a really good point. The link is incredibly powerful between the two, I'd say. And I think as well, it makes sense why Shivers is calling out to you in the church where there's a hole in the world, right? The pale, the existential threat to life itself. Shivers is going to, the Revacholière is going to speak up to be like, yo, can you fix that? That thing is going to kill us all. Of all of the voices inside of you, that's the one that's the most concerned. KYH, speaking from my playthrough, fascism in Disco Elysium and Harry is fundamentally about love. Fascism in Disco Elysium for Harry is fundamentally about love. Monstrous love that grinds over individuals, but love nonetheless. The Vision Quest description is turn back time and give love a second chance. Interesting given the current perspective on things. I started my second playthrough of Disco some time ago, and I paused, but like going back to it now with this extra context, I can't wait to see how it hits. Knowing a whole lot more about what those names, places, locations, and concepts mean. Asana, what is up? Since we're back on SATA, did you ever get around to watching the full People Make Games documentary? If it's still on the backlog, perhaps a reaction video sometime later would help. I did start it, but I didn't finish. So I still do want to get around to that. If anything, I'd probably just like go through it and then give my summarized bits, because I know it's like a full super long thing and such, and it's probably worth everybody's time to check out, certainly if you have an interest in that world. But yeah, I do want to go back and finish that off for sure. Okay. Thank you for indulging me.